Hello, Chef Marcus Guiliano here, and I want to answer a question from a group on Facebook. Let's see, it's a question about opening a restaurant, and here we go. So it's a new member on this. There's lots of Facebook groups out there for restaurant owners, restaurant professionals, cooks, line cooks, chefs to get on and share ideas and learn and get some answers and get some feedback, sort of like a little masterminding thing. So here's a post from a new member from one of the restaurant. All right, so here's the question. New here and first-time owners. All right, my wife and I are considering opening a restaurant in our hometown. The building is already there, and it will seat 100 with a full kitchen, pots, pans, down to the silverware. I'm concerned about what we can make based on Google searches and research, so maybe you guys can help. Would it be uncommon to easily be able to earn low mid six figures? That means probably income, low mid six figures. And if so, any tips would be appreciated. We would have to be around that number to cover our overhead personally. Thanks. So that's a fantastic question. So a professor of mine, culinary teacher of mine when I went to culinary school, always said, Marcus, I can teach you how to make a small fortune in the restaurant industry. He goes, do you know how? And I go, how? And he goes, start with a large fortune. Okay, that was sort of a joke, but in the realm of things, that's kind of reality, right? A lot of restaurants open. And they don't really understand the business. They don't really understand marketing. Maybe the location's off. They didn't have enough passion. They didn't have enough persistence. They didn't have something of enough to make it work, and they ended up wasting a lot of money. Now, this specific question comes down to how much can I make? Now, that is a super, super tough question to understand. A lot of restaurateurs do it for the passion. They do it for the passion because they love what they do, and they'll stick in the very, 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 very thin times. I mean, in my first 2-3 years, I should have filed bankruptcy. I should have thrown in the towel. If it was any business person, if I had to make $50,000 to personally live, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, we scraped by for a couple of years. There's a lot of key elements that we had learned, probably our third year in, that made us excel our income, made us excel revenue. Gross sales, net sales, or net profit. There was a lot of key factors that we turned in. We joined a mastermind group. We did a bunch of things to help. But now, opening up a restaurant, I already had 15 years experience in the field. I was a fantastic cook. I was an executive chef at 3 country clubs. I was good on numbers. I had a background in accounting. I took accounting courses in college as well as culinary. So I was on top of food costs, labor costs. I'm very analytical. I like numbers. I like menu engineering. I like running sales reports to sales mixes and figure out where I can tweak things and price things out to the drop. I mean, in my kitchen now, olive oil is priced out to the drop. So when something goes on a plate, we know how much it is. And I convey that to my staff. I'm like, well, that costs me, when you scoop that, it costs me 29 cents. If you're giving a double scoop of fig jam on the cheese plate, it's costing me 58 cents. I didn't price 58 cents, I priced 29 cents. And that's why the portions are hanging up and everything's specced out and this and that. But let's jump into the question of how much can you expect to make? First of all, there's so many variables to this question. And of course, the more sales you have, the more money you'll hopefully make. Now, the big corporations have figured it out. Like a TGI Fridays, if they do $1.5 million, they'll bring 15% to the bottom line. If they do $2.5 million in the same location, they're going to bring 25% to the bottom line. Now, they run a super tight ship, these chains, and that's why they're successful, and that's why they're all over the place, and they go in great locations, because they have it figured out. Us independents aren't as fortunate as the big chains like Olive Garden, TGI Fridays, Outback, Chipotle. We're not as fortunate to have all the kinds of resources and the money up front to say, hey, let's do this and rock this out. And I have a friend who owns 40 restaurants, and he told me one of his last rents he was signing was going to cost him $55,000 a month. And I'm scratching my head. I'm like, man, 55 grand a month? Are you crazy? He grabs out the napkin as we're at dinner and he writes things down. And he's like, Marcus, I'm going to do between $5 and $8 million in sales. I'm going to bring $2.5 million to the bottom line at paying $55,000 a month in rent. And I looked at him and said, yeah, you're right, based upon your numbers. And he has 40 restaurants around the world. So he knows what he's doing. He's an experienced restaurateur. So I don't recommend that people just jump into a lease that's $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a month. He has restaurants near Times Square, all over New York City, Vegas, Chicago, Tel Aviv, Dallas, Miami, Boston, Atlanta. He's really well-rounded as a restaurateur. But the more volume you do, you're going to increase your gains because you're already there. You're already paying the heat. You're already paying, everything's already figured out, and the more you can do. Now let's jump into some really key ratios that you need to understand. First of all, you need to understand prime cost. The most profitable restaurants run about a 50% prime cost. Now it's different for quick service, full service, casual versus fine dining versus steakhouse. These vary slightly, okay? But prime cost is your food, your cost of goods, so liquor and food, or booze and food and beverage. That's your beverage costs, alcohol costs, non-alcohol costs, your food costs, also your labor costs. It's called prime cost. Factor those two together. So the experts say 65% or less is what you want as a prime cost. So the closer you can get to 50%, I have some friends in my mastermind group that run under 50% for prime costs. It's amazing, under 50%. So 50% goes 65% or less to food and product labor and product being sold. Some restaurateurs are like, oh, I need a 28% food cost and a 28%, labor cost, and they're stuck on one labor and one food. I like to explain it as you can have a higher labor cost and lower food cost because you have more manpower to prep more raw product and make it. Or you have less manpower, so you have less labor cost, but you're buying maybe more prepared foods because you don't have the manpower to make all the foods. So it's a matter of, are you rolling and making hors d'oeuvres, or are you buying hors d'oeuvres? And of course, it's all predicated by if you're charging the right price, of course, right? And of course, managing your staff. But I like to look at the prime cost as one total cost and say, okay, that's my goal and that's where I'm at, and I can have a wiggle with each place. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, rent should be no more than 6%. No more than 6% of your overall gross sales. Okay, so that's a key number right there. And the first thing that I do, this is the very first step I do if I want to figure out if a restaurant's going to work. People come to me, offer me restaurants all the time. I have one restaurant, I'm happy with one restaurant. I like helping other restaurateurs. That's why I wrote books and I write for Forbes and things like that. So because I like sharing my knowledge. So they'll come to me and I'll figure out the gross sales. I'm like, okay, realtor A. Let's figure this out. There's 50 seats in this restaurant. Let's not look at what the other people did. Let's look at realistically what I need to do to make this happen. You might want to find out what the other people did because that might be relevant at some point down the road. But realistically, if you're not buying a restaurant, then those numbers are really kind of useless. If you're buying a name and you're buying that blue sky, you're going to want to say, okay, where's your database? Give me your database of 10,000 people, 20,000 people, 2,000 people. Oh, you don't have a database? You have no database? Wow, that just decrease the value of what you're trying to sell me because I can't reach out to those people and tell them that I'm open here now and the restaurant's continuing under my name, my regime, new management, whatever, new menu items. So not to lose focus on where we're going here. So back to 6% of overall sales. So you figure out how many seats, you kind of know your theme, you kind of know the cost per person, and you say, okay, I'm going to do sales of $500,000 here. I'm going to do sales of $1 million. Now backtrack 6% out of that. And you say, okay, well, 6% of $1 million, 6% of $1.5 million. Okay, so once you start plugging in the numbers, you're like, okay, so rent here should be $60,000 for the year. 60,000 divided by 5, okay, it's going to be $12,000 a month. I'm sorry, 12, it's $5,000 a month. I did that in a little reverse order. 60,000 divided by 12 is $5,000 a month. And you want $7,500 in rent is the first thing you say to the realtor. You want $7,500 in rent. Realistically, you and I just did a quick calculation here. You know it's only worth $5,000 because based upon the ratio of 6% of overall sales should go to rent, now we're in trouble. So now you're 50% more than where it really needs to be. So at that point, I would cease negotiations. I'd be like, well, there's no way that I would even consider going into this with that knowing of that. Now, as far as percentage of sales, profit, I teach my staff this. Now, you can go back to the example of TGI Fridays. The more they sell, the more they're going to make. That ratio widens the gap, right? So I teach my staff this. I put 100 pennies on the bar to a new staff member. And those 100 pennies, I say, okay, those 100 pennies on there, realistically, what a customer gives us, how much goes in the drawer and how much goes in my pocket and Marcus's pocket for his salary and profit or whatever. How much does Marcus make from that whole dollar that comes in? And as they're sitting there, they're counting out, they're figuring it out. They actually will put like 60 cents in the drawer and be like, here's 40 cents, Marcus, or 70-30 or 80-20. Nobody has ever been like 95-5. And realistically, that's really what it's like. It's like 95-5. It's like 90-8, 90-10. To get over a 10% profit margin, it's really tough in this industry. It's there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of restaurateurs that are going to outmarket the hell out of you. These people are marketing maniacs, so they're going to hire somebody, a firm to come in, an agency to come in, and just totally Facebook market, target ads, database, customer retention, loyalty program. There's so many things to know about retaining customers. Now, I opened with $50,000. I was way underfunded. That's why I ran out of money my first month, second month, third month, fourth month, and so on for the first couple of years until I actually gained some ground. But me, it was a passion. I had no other option. It was what the restaurant was. My wife wasn't working either. She quit her teaching job. So we were like, we're in this. We're going to do this. We took a home equity loan for $50,000, and I took $15,000 money from somebody else from a village loan fund, from a government loan fund that I had to pay back. And it was struggle after struggle after struggle, but because I struggled, I learned how to market myself. I learned how to do SEO myself. I learned how to do website myself. I learned how to do email marketing myself, database building, database management. I learned how to do all that myself because I couldn't afford anybody, and plus I'm a chef, so I cooked as well. And it took 3-4 years for me to actually get out of the kitchen and enjoy the front of my restaurant. I wouldn't change the things. I learned so much along the way. But realistically, figure out the gross sales and say, okay, if I'm going to do $1.5 million or $1 million, and realistically on $1 million, I'm probably going to bring 10%, 8% to the bottom line. That's $80,000. On $1 million, that's $80,000. If you're going to do $2 million, figure you're going to bring $150,000 to the bottom line. Okay, so figure out what you can do overall. Figure out your theme. Figure out your pricing. Figure out realistically the numbers of what you're going to be, and always kind of under budget. That's what we did at the restaurant here. Under budgeted, and it's just I kind of went into the mind very naive in the beginning because I wanted my own place. I really wanted my own place. So I hope that helps with your question. One thing I always tell investors, my friend who owns 40 restaurants, he gets investors like crazy. He doesn't even use his own money because he's so well known that when investors come to him, he goes, listen, I'll take your money, but I'm not showing you a business plan. This is a very, very high-risk business. There's a chance you're not going to get anything back. I'm not going to show you a business plan, but you see my other restaurants that are successful. And he's had restaurants that have failed. He goes, I'm not going to show you a business plan. The deal with this is the restaurant is not allowed to make money until you're paid back. You're only getting paid back face value too. If you're giving me $100,000, I'm going to give you $100,000 back, but I'm going to give you a percentage of the restaurant. So 20 people invest, he gets $1 million, sometimes two. In the case of one of his Vegas restaurants, $10 million. So he gets all these guys to put the money up. He takes 20% of the equity and gives it to these 20 guys. They each own 1%. Now he pays some of his guys back in a year and a half. Clean, paid back this and that. Some of his investors, some concepts, it takes them 3, 4, 5 years to pay him back. But he has a 20-year lease. So for 17 years to 15 years, that person gets 1% of the profits. And now in his one location where he's paying $60,000, $55,000 in rent, and he's going to bring $3 million to the bottom line, $2 million, they're getting 1% of that for 15 years. So that's where they get their money. They get their money from the residual of their 1% equity for the 20 guys. He retains 80%. He gives 10% to a chef and 10% to a manager, and he covers between 50 and 60%. That's his ratio. That's his formula. That's what's worked for years for him. And that's why he's probably one of the most successful restaurateurs out of there, under the spotlight anyway. He does not like the spotlight. But he shares everything with me on the operation stuff, and I really admire. He's an amazing business person. He's not really a chef at all. He knows food, knows wine, but he knows business. He knows business. He knows numbers. He can figure that out. So, to make mid six figures, 150,000, 125,000. I don't know the situation. I don't know your area. I don't know the demographics. I don't know what you plan on doing. But find out what you plan on doing in sales first, and then work your numbers back. Now, there's a lot of other factors in there that'll help you along the way. And I guess if you direct message me, I could shoot you a list of key ratios that you need to know. Like, okay, so let's break down your beverage sales. How much should be soda? How much of your total purchases should be going to chemicals? And that's like 2%. How much of your overall labor should be benefits to your staff, right? So I have all those kind of numbers broken down in a chart, so I can easily provide those. It's a lot to read off of down here, so it's really a long list. So that's it for now. I hope that answers your question, and thanks for watching.